Hi everyone, welcome to another live stream for the Data Vault Innovators community. I'm Julien Redmond and I'm joined today by Richard Harris and Steve Rose. So guys, why don't you do a quick intro, Steve?
Thank you. Steve Rose. So I've joined Certus February this year, so I'm now the practice manager at Certus. My background has been generally whole of IT, managed a number of digital transformations, data warehousing and analytics projects as well. Prior to that, I was software engineer and database designer.
And Richard Harris, Commercial Director for Certus Insight, about 25 years in data, mostly focusing on customer data, so analytics, insight, data quality and protection.
And currently with a clipping.
Yes, currently with a minor injury.
So we're going to dive in today. This is the second live stream that we've done. And I guess apologies to start with that we didn't manage to get one done late last month, but we'll be endeavouring to do these every month now. So this at the end of each month you should see this pop up. So in the past month we've had a good amount of interaction on the platform, and we thought we'd start with having a look at some of the questions that have actually been asked. And Russell Searle, who we know pretty well, is a very, very strong Data Vault advocate, asked some really good questions, I think, on the platform around the structure of a team. So, guys, let's have a little chat about what he asked. So, his question was actually if he was going to deliver a new Data Vault initiative, and deliver a Data Vault that could deliver extensions to the business and at an ever-increasing rate. And what would the team look like? What skills would they need? What headcount would he need? Who should come on board first? And then how could they actually set it up so that they could scale and accelerate? And I guess what assumptions are we making by answering that as well? So I know Nols has already answered it on the site. So if you're on the site, and you can jump into the chat in the forums and go back and have a look at the detailed answers. But it's a really good question, so let's have a chat about it. So any thoughts, Steve?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, in an ideal world, you'd probably want to bring, your whole team on at the same time if possible, but practically that's not always possible. So I'd probably suggest a technical business analyst, your resources aimed around your requirements to basically elicit requirements from the business, start grooming the backlog ready while you're bringing on your delivery staff. I'd certainly be bringing on the modelers and the testers at the same time so that you could get started in that agile cadence. And delivering frequent drops to the business. In terms of size, I guess it really depends upon, what the magnitude is. That would probably be different on a case-by-case basis. But I think at a minimum, you'd probably be wanting, even just for succession's sake, at least 2 testers, two modelers. You'd be wanting your Scrum Master. You'd be wanting your technology business analyst. I think that's probably what I would offer at this time.
This is actually quite a timely question. I was having coffee with a client just recently. They do have Data Vault, but they are really limited in their ability to expand and grow their Data Vault capability because of the nature of how their team or their organisation is structured. Culturally, they use a lot of contractors that are coming in and out, usually within 6 months. And so that really limits their ability to train people on Data Vault, develop those skills and build up that team cohesion. So for me, I think there's actually a step prior, which is making sure that the organisation has been educated on what Data Vault is, because as we know, it's more than a model. It does require a change in how data is managed, the processes that you follow, how you structure your teams, etc. And so there's a lot of non-technical people that can get in the way of effective Data Vault projects. So for me, I think there is that first step of making sure that you've educated the business on what Data Vault is, where the value is going to be derived from and how, and then looking at your capabilities to deliver that Data Vault in the context of, as I say, the culture, your current skills base, the technology, that you have, and of course the budget that is available to you. So I think for me, that would be a very important first step that would then drive the answer to that question in terms of how you proceed with your data vault.
There's multiple customers right now, obviously, trying to find data vault skills in the market. Obviously, we're always creating people with more data vault skills and trying to create those for internally and for customers. It kind of goes to show that having data vault certification is actually a really good career move. If you're a contractor or looking to further your career in information management. So definitely the training, but then it also comes down to having someone to mentor people with new skills. So so that when they've got the certification, maybe got some experience into some tools that you actually have someone to mentor them through. And so obviously, a lot of our engagements are kind of coaching in nature, helping a wider team to deliver more rather than just we do it all for people. I think that's going to continue. But on the platform, if you look, there's the two forums, the Q&A forum, where Russell put his question, but also there is a recruitment forum, and you'd see that Brad from TAC posted some of the positions that they have down there. I know they're definitely looking for people with data vault skills or people who have the right background and want to learn it, and we'll be helping them to train up some people. But it is hard if your business is not structured to have full-time employees and you can invest in them, and you're trying to just leverage skills in the market. Data vault skills are quite rare and sought after at the moment. So I guess if you're listening to this and you don't have a data vault certification and you are looking to increase your chances of employment, then data vault certification certainly helps from that point of view. There's one other question which I'm going to throw to you guys, and I didn't prep you for this earlier. Is another question Russell actually asked was around recommendations for testing tools. And I know testing is a really interesting conversation that might dominate the rest of this conversation, but Nols has mentioned back to Russell Query Surge and Cucumber and the HPALM. So there are some testing tools, but I think we'll dive into data breaches shortly, but from a tool perspective, Steve, like, are they the things you think of? I mean, it doesn't seem like necessarily tools is the answer.
Data gaps is another one, but I think tooling only supplements the process generally. So I think that the process of testing has got to be, separate out your SIT and UAT from your functional testing. Small incremental tests should be structured and designed. Data should ideally be synthesized, not using live data or even desensitized live data, just synthesized data in sufficient quantities that you'd be able to assign pass or fail criteria to all the tests that you're developing. So it's about quick, rapid and repeatable testing. If you can orient your processes around that and then use tooling to support it, you're off to a really good foundation.
So we know, I guess, what's in the news right now, Medibank and Optus and Telstra and what was the other one, MyDeal. We don't know specifically that those were breaches into a warehouse, but we do know in some cases that it was test environments. So testing is not just a question now about efficiency, but actually about security. So you're making a really good point, I think, about about running off a test data set. Like, what else can be done? Like there is other ways to encrypt and PII data and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's really, I think probably the single most biggest impact that you can have on your PII data is locking it down to the people and the business processes that actually need it. We tend to operate a little bit on more is better rather than less is more when it comes to data, because storage is cheap and so on and so forth. One company that we deal with did an internal assessment in one area of their business and discovered that 87% of PII data they could reduce their PII data footprint by 87% just by providing access to only those people that actually needed it. So you think about it, that's 87% that you're increasing your risk exposure by allowing people that don't need that data to have access to it. We all know, anyone that's working in IT know that people are the biggest risk when it comes to data. So restricting who has access to it and maintaining that on an ongoing basis is probably your biggest bang for buck. Of course, there's a whole ton of other things that you can do, making sure that data is encrypted in REST and in transit and all that sort of stuff, protecting your APIs and all that. And certainly, we've been approached by organisations to look at how they're managing their PII data. This is different from cyber resilience so much. It's more around looking at the PII data that they have, how they manage it, how that data is moved around, how it's modified, updated, all that sort of stuff, to be able to provide recommendations on how they can, improve their handling and reduce the risk of that data leaking into the wrong hands, particularly third parties as well. So that's another area. We found out as well from another client that they outsource a survey, for example. Now, that survey does not specifically ask for PII data, but it does have the catch-all question that everyone's familiar with is, have you any other comments and would you like us to contact you? And some of those people say yes, and of course they put in their email address or their phone number. Straight away you've got PII data. And then, is that system being, carefully managed? Is that sensitivity being considered when that system's being managed and operated? And quite often you'd find that there's a bit of a gap between the sensitivity that should be applied to that data set and the sensitivity that's actually being applied to that data set.
There is an element when we're talking about testing as well. Yes, there is a focus on the technical aspects of testing. Is the process working? Where are the failure points? But you should also be asking, what else do I need to test in this context of, we're delivering insight to the business. So constantly checking in and testing, well, actually, are we delivering on the value that the business wants? Are we saving time operationally? Are people following the processes that we've laid out for them, or are they taking shortcuts? I don't know. There's a lot of technology that will necessarily solve that, but having that as part of your mindset when looking at testing is about testing that environment. I mean, to Steve's point, yes, I think that I did a quick search this morning, and it's still, most of the analysts are saying in excess of 80% of data breaches are directly related to some form of human error. So when you're thinking about, the testing angle and looking at the entire gamut of what you need to think about, those are the kinds of things to really be, to be aware of, particularly in this environment of making sure that we're thinking about all those little areas of potential risk and making sure that processes are being followed and the right governance structure is in place to limit that opportunity for human error.
Yeah, you can waste a lot of money, on building a stronger perimeter, essentially.
Absolutely.
While allowing test data to sit fairly ungoverned. So, obviously, we know there are plenty of organisations out there that are currently still using copies of prod in test. Obviously, that's never been a Data Vault standard, and it's not recommended. And obviously, given the light of the current scenarios, we would encourage everyone who is in that scenario to address their testing as part of that resilience program. Rich, I know you do a lot of training around privacy and what have you. So give us your view on the implications of all of this, the fines, I guess, and other things to consider from a business perspective.
Well, I think the current fines clearly are not enough to make the board sit up and take notice. There has been a lot of work done in trying to secure information. I like the fact that the government is now talking about $50 million fines for significant breaches, because that's the kind of number that's going to affect the chairman's bonus. And I think that's what needs to happen, because the cost of the investment in structuring your business and maturing your workforce in their understanding of how data should be handled now there's a business case, whereas before people could look at the fines and say, well, yeah, we'll take the risk. And I think we're paying the price for that. So I think moving forward, as we've already said, probably the biggest impact any organisation can take is simply looking at who has access to what information, what are they doing with it, what decisions are they making with it, etc., and are they justified in having access to some of this more sensitive information. And we had a fairly lengthy discussion yesterday over lunch. The number of organisations that we see that talk about this idea of self-managed business intelligence or self-service insight, for a lot of these organisations, they're building a massive data mart full of all this great data and then just pumping it out to the workforce and expecting them to be able to do their analysis from there. The reality is building more data marts that you can control who has access to what level, hiving off your more sensitive information in those satellites where you've got much tighter controls, gives you that ability to deliver to the business what they need without necessarily compromising risk.
Yeah.
So I would expect to see a lot of organisations start to take a serious look at how they're structured and getting as part of mandatory annual training a more thorough understanding of this is the implication if you mishandle data. This is why it is highly valuable. We've seen a lot of those online once a year. Here's a scenario. Here's multiple choice. Answer the question. If you get it all wrong, you can just go back and redo it. No one absorbs that. It now needs to be something that is taken very, very seriously and carries with it, responsibilities in job descriptions and the like.
I wonder if they're going to start understanding the reputational damage too. I think all three of us have been affected by at least one of these breaches. Mm-hmm. I know personally I spent the good part of a day changing passwords and getting a license reissued and all those sorts of things that are just painful to have to do in life. That experience is very likely to make me change provider for that service.
Yep.
Do you think that's going to start hitting home?
I think, look, it has to have some impact, but let's not discount how lazy some people could be. And the difficulty of changing, telco providers. I'm sure Optus are going to have to make good on a lot of things, but are they going to lose customers because we've already got a breach now out of Telstra as well?
Where do you go?
Where I think the bigger impact on the market is an increasing distrust of organisations handling our personal information. Now when someone is asked, give us your email address, give me your phone number, they're going to have to justify why they need that information, how they're going to use it, and what direct controls consumers can have. We're already seeing the telcos start talking about a delay of the CDR, which to me is ridiculous. It should be brought forward, if anything, because that's what will put trust back into the market, because without that level of PII, without that data access to us, it really does impact our ability to improve customer experience, improve product development, all those things that we want to be able to do. If we can't show that we can be trusted with that data, then the consumers are just going to back away.
So, there's the test side. Don't use product data in test. Have the right processes. There's the data access side, and we're partnered with InfoVia. They're members on the DVIC. Tim and Mike are both members. You could reach out to them. Their tool's really, quite sophisticated around how it addresses applying data access controls over information marts and not creating one massive mart to service all services, but be a bit more specific. So there's lots of things that are they're not rocket science. They're not massively hard to implement. You are just saying test data set. You're just saying some controls around data access. You're saying, divisional data marts or use case data marts and those sorts of things. It's lots of small things that can actually, really restrict the potential of copies of PII data.
You mentioned earlier the skills shortage. It's been a perennial issue, particularly in this market, but globally for a long time. As businesses have an increasing demand and appetite to use data, that then drives a demand for people who can come in and help manage that data. but that's not an infinite resource. So there's always been this reticence for organisations to invest in cultivating skills of the people already on the ground. They've always had a preference to, hey, I'll just go and hire those people in. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, what we're now seeing is you're hiring people who actually don't have the capability, who have said they can on the CV, and they've muddled their way through. And so, again, businesses that have taken that short-term view have probably started paying that price, whereas if, 5-10 years ago, they started to invest in educating their existing staff, getting them upskilled, even the non-technical staff on how to handle data and so forth, we likely wouldn't be seeing these kinds of things be happening.
I completely agree. Actually, a good example of that is you look at report development, for example. There's a lot of non-functional requirements that come out of report development that feed back into information database modelling, so that you start to introduce bad practice of joining information together, which can have an impact on who has access to the data. Because if it's not modelled in the right way, and we have to fudge the model so that report developers can read it and produce the reports, instead of coaching the business and working with the business and say, this is the way that it should be done for these reasons, and help that spread that awareness, you start modelling it properly, having the access really battened down, getting the reports that the business needs.
I worked with a CIO, this is going back giving my age away, but probably at least 10, 15 years ago. And there was a migration to a new reporting platform. And so the CIO stopped delivering all reports to the business. And the instruction to his team was, when someone rings up and asks where their report is, you ask them, why do you need the report and what decisions are you making with it? Most of the reports, no one called up. They just didn't they no longer got the reports. And this is when the reports were emailed, not the dashboards and so forth. Those people who didn't call up, they saved themselves half the reports. And then when they started asking, well, what decisions are you making? Oh, nothing. I just like to look at the report. Well, you're not getting that report anymore. So instantly they got it down to like 30% of the reports now were going out. They saved themselves all that time and effort, and only those people that genuinely needed that report in order to make a decision for the business would get that information. Now, that's a pretty blunt instrument, but I always hearken back to that example of a pragmatic and realistic approach to, no, you don't need carte blanche access to the data just because you say you do.
And it could be actually worse than that. We're working with a client at the moment where we've done a review of all their reports, and they had something like 440 reports that can be rationalised down to 60.
Right.
And in an organisation where you have silos, you'll end up with reports A and B that could easily be merged into report C, because with embedded, and this goes to your self-serve sort of BI. If you have those embedded pockets of report developers within the business, then you end up with 80% similarity across the board of all your reports. So if you don't have that central oversight and management of that, you could end up with a vast library of reports when you just don't really need them.
Exactly.
It comes down to, can you trust the report? And can you trust that the data's correct and that it was secure? I mean, information governance is like the broad spectrum kind of thing of this, but just being able to secure the data, know that it's not been messed with or it's not been lost, and that you've got people helping you either design a data mart structure that supports some self-service ad hoc stuff, or really proficient BAs or report developers in departments that can help other users to get a report that they can actually make a decision on rather than just look at. Like this is what most businesses are struggling with, and it's and I think the other aspect too, like we're talking to a Data Vault audience. Most people kind of, I think, probably know that Data Vault grew in a highly secure environment. Like there is definitely ways to very easily segregate PII data from the rest of your data, on the same hub, different satellites with encryption and all those things. It's like the capabilities are all there, and it's really just knowing that the processes and the policies exist or the capabilities exist and then putting them into practice. And I think that's that's part of your point, Rich, is people come in with half the knowledge. They don't really know how to put all of that into practice. And then the workaround is, well, we'll just use a copy of some production data for this.
Or they'll take a shortcut because they know they can deliver, now that budget has been met, it's come in on time and the management's happy. But, we've just added a big hunk of technical debt that someone's going to pay later on. I think, again, we're back to that. The data maturity, particularly of the management level, executive level, and making sure they understand that the serious nature of what this data asset is. It needs to be looked after, it needs to be protected, and it needs to be, tightly governed, because otherwise, people will naturally try and take the path of least resistance in delivering to their KPIs. So bonuses are linked to delivering a project on time. You can be sure they're going to take shortcuts to deliver on time, particularly if you're working with third parties who have bonuses tied to delivering ahead of budget and time.
I think that's very true. We're seeing, certainly a few of the clients that we're working with at the moment, is that they value insight a lot more than they value data, and that whole process of recognising that data governance is not a technology thing; it's a business thing. Of which technology is part of. It's not about tooling; it's about understanding the risks and having the appropriate operational governance framework in place. That those decisions around data access, data management, data maturity are being made by a group that represent senior level operational decision makers.
I mean, the bonus thing's a really interesting point, because we've talked a lot, in the Data Vault community around how do you make Data Vault important or even understandable, I guess, to C-level execs who they just want the reports. They want them to be right. They want them to be actionable, but they just want the reports. They want analytics. They don't want data management. And I remember actually one exec telling me, I never want to do data modeling ever again. It's like, well, that's great, but that's not a reality. And so maybe with some of this is the implication that there are fines on the line that, for losing data, there are bonuses that might be affected, those sorts of things. Like it's obviously a stick rather than a carrot. It's not the right way to kind of get there. We would prefer that people care about looking after their data as the asset that it is, but
there's plenty of carrots out there. There's, again, lots and lots of statistics and surveys and reports coming out that when you look at how customers feel, that a lot of them will say that they will choose a company based upon their experience, because the differentiation of products, if you look at energy, for example, well, there is no differentiation. It's still electricity being pumped into your house. So how do you decide the difference? It's what level of service, what's my customer experience like with supplier A over supplier B. And the only way you can compete that way is to be able to use data effectively. So if you now have a market where people do not want you to use their data, and again, more and more people now are going to get the ability to opt out of having their data being utilised. That's the way that the market is going. If we can't do a good enough job to demonstrate why we should have access to it and prove ourselves through better customer experience, again, the cycle will continue. So if genuinely organisations need to compete at the customer experience level, you need data to do that. If people stop giving you the data, well, you can do the maths yourself.
Yeah, they need to trust you.
There's a title I read on a LinkedIn post. I'm not sure I 100% subscribe to it, but it certainly does resonate with me, which is no data is better than bad data.
Yeah. Well, I guess if it makes you make the wrong decision, rather than go looking for the better data, there's an aspect there. But look, we're getting really close to out of time. So thanks, guys, for joining. It was a good chat, and I'm sure we'll be talking about data privacy and a range of other things over the next few months. So as I said right at the start, we're going to try and stick to a really regular schedule for this, so you know when it's happening and that it's coming. You'll see it through the platform, so on the mobile app or or on the web app. And also, obviously, we've got the LinkedIn group, so we'll post it into there as well. So lots more content coming as well. We've got a few other sponsors of the community coming on board now, so you'll start seeing some content from other providers, which is great to have them on board. And then we'll be growing that over the next few months as well. So please get involved. What we might do is put up a post leading in the week leading into the next one to try and get some questions from the audience. And I know we've had a few technical difficulties today, so if you're watching this, you're probably watching it after we actually recorded it. But usually it'll be a live stream that you can actually post live questions to as well. So thanks for joining. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.